I think with every single planche tutorial video I've seen on YouTube, all of them advocate for perfect form when doing every single working set. They always say, do all of your workouts with perfect form, do every single rep set with that good form, and once you break down that form, just finish it off there and accept that pride or ego, whatever. But then you look at their other videos where they show their personal planche progression from like 0 to full planche, and then you see that every single one of those, like I'm saying, every single planche progression video, they all learn the planche, the full planche with bad form, and then they refine it. And I've never come across someone that's learned the full planche with perfect form for every single progression. And I think there's a reason for this. I've talked about this with Mantis Calisthenics, and we've discussed that, or at least he's stated that the reason why is because there's a lack of progressive overload if you get too obsessed with the perfect form. So I guess with like anecdotal advice, like take for example this. I think there's many people here that struggle to go from tuck planche to advanced tuck. And they're always saying like, oh, my tuck planche has very good form. It's perfect. I've got full protraction and depression. Like, why am I not gaining that strength to advance to those harder like variations? And it's because when you get too obsessed with that perfect form, you lack the progressive overload and that stimulus in the submaximal holds. So when you're doing your volume work and your form starts to break down a bit, you might just start to lean a bit less if you're doing like planche leans, right? In order to maintain the protraction of your scapula. If that's the case, you lose that intensity, you lose that progressive overload that allows for that stimulus or that strength gain required for you to progress in the planche. And if you are instead of like leaning more in your planche leans and getting more of that intensity, and instead you compromise that by just keeping the good form and then leaning less, you're just not giving yourself that drive or like that intensity required for the planche. And I guess as an analogy, you can kind of consider it as like cutting diamonds, right? If your job is to refine this diamond, which is your planche, right? And so first you need to understand the shape, right? The shape is going to be your objective, the full planche. And then you start to do those cutting edges, you cut around, you polish it, you allow for like the refraction of the light and whatever. And that is cleaning up the form. You don't clean up the form first. You don't like sharpen and refine every edge at the start. You have to cut it down to get that perfect shape, the shape first, the general shape, that raw, crude state, and then you start to refine it. I think that it's so much faster to learn the planche with bad form and then to clean it up versus learning every single stage with perfect form. Because if you're obsessed with this perfect form analogy or like this ideology, you are setting yourself up for plateau, for you to plateau, because you fear the idea of losing the integrity of your good form. And I think what we need to understand and advocate for is that there's a point where you can sacrifice form. And I don't think it's as excessive in calisthenics versus free weights, right? With free weights, ideally you want to learn the good form first, establish it, because the movement is always the same. The bench press was always the same, that movement's always the same. The only thing that changes is the weight. But things such as like calisthenics skills, you are changing leverages, you're leaning more, and you're changing these loads on your shoulder. So your movement is constantly evolving, it's constantly changing. So you can't expect to establish perfect form at the very start and then work on like that overload, because that's not how it works. You need baby steps before you can run. You can't just learn how to run at the start and just run for every single progression. You need to have like that poor form, all those little steps, in order for you to go into that, beyond that comfort zone and learn those harder progression variations. So I think what is lacking in this planche community is the idea that you need to obsessively focus on good form. I personally think, and I think some people do agree with this, is that there's a point where you should work on progressive overload and that progression over form. So yeah, that was basically the main thing that was going on in this session, and I'll finish it off here.